Welcome to Inspire Me with Jay. This is a podcast to inspire, uplift, show forth the love of God, and help usher in the spiritual awakening. Welcome to Inspire Me with Jay. I'm your host, Jay Spillers, author and teacher, and I have a guest today, Laura Jane. How are you, Laura?
Hi, I'm feeling great. I'm so thankful to be here. Thank you for the invitation and this adventure to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming. So, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so currently I work mainly in the name of helping people with their practices like mindfulness and meditation and yoga and breath work. I come from a background in psychology. I went to graduate school in psychology before I got interested and involved with things like yoga and mindfulness and meditation. But it's been about 25 years now that I've been out in the field teaching and sharing these practices with adults and children, and yeah, just sharing the power of how we can take care of ourselves and get into our spirituality with building some of this into our lives in personal ways. So yeah, that's some of how I like to describe myself these days.
So, how did you get into meditation and mindfulness?
That's a great question. Well, I know that after going through my graduate school in psychology, I knew that I was interested in learning more about the mind-body connection and health and wellness, and even more Eastern approaches. But I didn't even know really what that meant. So I think I personally started to be interested just for my own development as a young adult and someone interested in our mind and what's possible. But really, it came through my getting into yoga, which really encompasses things like meditation and mindfulness. And it took me many years to keep practicing and learning before I felt ready to teach about things like meditation, because I felt like I started to see there's so many different styles and approaches and even kind of some misconceptions out there. So I've been happy to feel more confident to share after many years of practice and study, and even just helping more of us open up our minds about what these things can be for us in very simple ways.
So, when did you start doing yoga and meditation?
Well, so I've been teaching those things for 25 years. So I guess a little bit about a year before that. I started to get into, I guess I was practicing yoga for a couple years before I really realized I wanted to share it. And I do love to share and even teach things. So I decided to get involved with the yoga teacher training. That was a year-long program. So that was in the year 2000 that I went through that training and got to be a part of the studio offering that. So that was my foundational start, but it's really one of those things that's like a lifetime study and practice, and there's always so much to keep learning and understanding. So that has been part of my learning and understanding as well, that I'll continue to be exploring and learning and discovering.
So, do you practice yoga and meditation personally yourself every day?
Yeah, I do make it a point to build in some of those practices every day, because I have come to see how much it makes a difference for me and the people that I work with when we build some of these practices in more like every day. And so for me, yes, I do make it a point to get on the mat and do a short practice with some of the stretches and exercises that are a good fit for my body, and also a form of meditation and mindfulness when we're doing the exercises. And then I have various ways I like to get in meditation. I like to share that meditation can be lots of things, including things like walking and time in nature and even petting a cat. So I like to do things like a daily meditation walk, and just really seeing how it's all a chance for mindfulness, and been learning more about how to apply that with our emotional work and healing, and how we can bring that into things like a meditation walk, or our time with some stretches or other practices that we could call meditation or mindfulness. Yeah. So that's some of how I make sure to build some of that in for me. And also just paying attention to what I also like to share, that really anything that we're focusing on, in a sense, can become a form of meditation. So that's where we want to pay attention to also, like, what are we meditating on in our days and our lives, and how's that playing into how we're feeling about life and the world and other humans. So just being aware of what we're reading, what we're listening to, who we're listening to, and how that's its own form of meditation. And so just being attentive to how that is playing a role in how we might be feeling and functioning in our lives in the world. So, yeah.
So you kind of see meditation and mindfulness as a way of life too.
Yeah, I definitely love to share that that's become my understanding more than ever, so that even when we're doing something that might look like a practice, I mean, if we do want to sit on a pillow and make a mudra and have that classic look of meditation, we can. But either way, it really is about how we're using that in daily life. So if we do have times that feel more like a specific practice, that can be great. But really, I've learned the whole point is then to be able to bring that into how we're being in our conversations and in our relationships and in our challenges, and how we can make it a way of life more. Absolutely. Yeah.
So have you had sort of like epiphanies during meditation? Kind of like aha moments and stuff?
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like we can see that when we're meditating, we are getting a chance to observe the mind, which part of that can be unpleasant, right? To see some of our patterns and some of our neuroses and some of how we're not being functional in the minds, right? With most of us. But also that's part of the fun too, is that as we learn to quiet the mind more and get in more of a receptive mode, that it 100% can be about allowing in those new ideas or the solutions or the answered prayers. And if we like the idea of a spiritual connection, that can be what that can be about as well. Like as we quiet the mind more and listen more, that we're going to be more receptive to that inner voice or the voice of God, or, whatever we like to see that as, or just the good ideas or the realizations and ahas. So, yeah, that's part of what's so fun to share, the why and why we'd want to work with this and build it into our lives.
So, I mean, meditation can be used strictly for the health benefits and doesn't necessarily have to be religious or spiritual. But it sounds like for you personally, you do incorporate a spiritual component to it.
I do enjoy adding that in, but that's one of the things I've always found. I want to be so careful in how I talk about that, because first of all, that's such a personal thing, right? Our sense of spirituality and whether or not we want to have that in our lives, and then whatever we conceive that to be and whatever we call it. So it's such a personal thing. And some people really don't have an interest in that. And I love to honor that. That's awesome too. So yeah, that's what's so cool and holistic about something like meditation, is it can have these benefits for changing how we're using our mind and helping our mental health, getting us more in the aha moments, and even opening us up more spiritually. But it's also, now we know, even with science's help, how it helps with regulating the nervous system, and just things that, like, practicing relaxing is really a good idea. And one of my favorite teachers, Michael Singer, who wrote The Untethered Soul, who talks and teaches a lot about these things, talks about how relaxation really is the primary technique that we're learning with a lot of these practices, and that now we know more than ever is so helpful for us humans, especially as many of us are more on the stress side of the nervous system. And yeah, so it's cool to see that these kind of practices, even just like a few minutes of very simple mindful meditation, can have these mental benefits, physical benefits, create these physiological changes that do boost our immunity and regulate our systems and generally just strengthen us and help us function better mentally and physically. So it's an exciting time that now even more doctors recommend these things, right? Because more research is being done at the actual effects of these things. And it's good news, right? And I love that it's something that we can do for ourselves, to ourselves. And that's just so empowering that as much as we might benefit from the help of others, it's nice to discover what we can build into our days that can do that kind of care for us mentally and physically and even emotionally, that can be so simple and, like you said, become a way of life too.
Well, it's interesting you said relaxation, because I've seen different definitions of meditation, but I mean, the definition I sort of use is it's being aware while in a highly relaxed state, awareness while in a highly relaxed state.
I love that. I feel like, and I've never heard it said that like cleanly, and I like that so much because I feel like what the relaxed state is implying, because part of what I get from teachers like John Kabat-Zinn is how important the non-judgment aspect is, right? And if we're not bringing in non-judgment, it's not meditation, he would say. But I feel like when we say the relaxed quality, that's really what that's implying. When we're in non-judgment, that goes with being more relaxed. So, and the physiology of being more relaxed. So I think that's a great definition that, again, invites more people in, because that's the thing. I think some people have a misconception about what meditation is or has to be. And so they aren't using it because it's some misconceptions. And that's why I think it's so nice to keep it that simple, that it's about being aware and relaxed, which sounds so simple, but it's actually a big deal, right? For most of us humans, it's pretty different than the way we're functioning, even though it's our nature, right? It's interesting that it's bringing us back to our nature, like how we were born to be, like how children are, just aware and relaxed. We just like gotten trained out of that through life and culture. So it's about remembering that. It's just like, oh yeah, we feel and function better when we're just like more aware and more relaxed, right? It can be that simple. And whatever helps us keep reestablishing that awareness and relaxed approach.
You're listening to the Inspire Me with Jay podcast. Please do like and subscribe to the channel, bringing hope and inspiration to the world.
Well, it's kind of like with exercise, you can get all kinds of exercise equipment. You can read all kinds of books about how to do it more effectively, and those are all good. But sometimes exercise could be as simple as putting your shoes on and going out and taking a walk. Well, meditation can kind of be like that too, is that,
Absolutely.
you can learn all kinds of techniques and whatnot, but it can be simple too.
Oh, and I've really been into sharing things simply as long as I've been sharing. And I think that's because that's what works for me too, to keep it really simple. But yeah, just to recognize how so many things can be a form and a practice of meditation and mindfulness, and how it is just about these simple shifts. It doesn't need to be complicated. Like one thing that I really like to clarify is I feel like there's some misconceptions about this whole quiet the mind thing, right? Because I think we get the sense that, oh yeah, meditation's supposed to help me learn to quiet my mind. But then for most of us, if we can't for very long, we're like, oh, I can't meditate, right? But what I love, I get from a lot of teachers, is two different ways of looking at it. That one is just about finding ways to quiet down the mind, to get it quieter, even if it doesn't get completely quiet, right? And also that quieting could mean just like 2 to 5 seconds of quieting. And even if that's as long as we can create it for, or kind of allow it for, that's still a big deal. And it's really curative to the mind and really shifts our thinking, boosts our creativity, relaxes the body. So I really love to share like, ooh, just try like 2 to 5 seconds of quiet. And then the whole practice, like I'm sure you know and share, is about then when those thoughts do come back in, to not get mad about that or judge it, right? But just to be aware and relaxed about that, right? And then trying again, like, oh yeah. And could it be just about relaxing the mind, but even just 2 to 5 seconds as a goal and an accomplishment for most of us Westerners, you know?
Well, I think too is, you hear sometimes people talk about emptying the mind, and it's actually, I mean, I've heard in some Hindu forms of meditation they do that, but like in Buddhist and some of the other faith traditions where meditation comes in, it's not so much about emptying the mind, but it's about focusing the mind on something,
Right. And I think it both could be true, and even that it could be just about focusing on emptying the mind, right? But I think that too is just, it's more to fun to play with that as an idea. And even if you had an image of that in your mind, like, I'm just going to kind of imagine I can empty my mind for a moment, and just the power of that as a practice, right? Again, because we know how imagination's so powerful. And then I love to bring in that we're so aware now of the placebo effect, right? So just kind of deciding that I'm going to use this practice to try to quiet my mind works just with what we know of the placebo effect. But again, I think it's just like being more open to the definition of emptying the mind. Like, it may not completely empty forever, and then we're just going to one day never have any thoughts. I don't know that that's really the goal or what many humans have accomplished, right? But it's just more, I think, experimenting with ways we can quiet down the mind or empty at least some of what's in there, and what helps us do that. Speaking of another thing I like to share, I feel is a form of meditation, is journaling. I feel like is like an active form of meditation that really can be easier for some of us. And what's cool about something like journaling is it absolutely is a way to empty the mind in a sense, and to realize that we're getting a chance to get that out of our head and onto the page, and even the energy of the thoughts or even stored emotions and feelings, that we're getting a chance to process that and even release that with something like journaling as a form of mindfulness and meditation. So I'm a big fan of journaling, and that's one of my big practices to take care of my mind and emotions and even my spiritual connection. Do you like to do much journaling?
Yes. I haven't really done too much, but I do writing because I write books and stuff like that. So in a sense,
Right.
I kind of write all the time.
I bet. Yeah. Yeah. I'd love to hear more about your process with that someday.
Yeah. Well, I think you're an author, aren't you?
Yes, I am. And I have come to really enjoy the process of writing books, doing it in a way that really it is about how I tune myself with my practices so that I can sit and write what I've decided to write. And then the last few books I've written have very much felt like more like a download of the idea, and just really letting it even be more of like that kind of like a spiritual download coming through me. So that's been really fun to allow as how I like to write books. So it's been really fun to write them. I'm still getting better at like the finishing stages of publishing, because I've been very do it myself. So I have 2 books right now that are about ready to be on Amazon. But sometimes I get a little stuck at the last steps, but I do love the writing of the books. That comes pretty easily to me now. Yeah, so that's right. I'd love to hear how you like to go about that too, because it's a magical process, right? It can be to be in on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes you just sort of get in the flow and you just keep writing, and then other times it's kind of hard to get into it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
How many books have you written?
Well, I haven't published all the books I've written, but I've published on Amazon. The first book that I published, and I was just kind of like knowing I wanted to get some of what I was sharing of with the yoga and such, and even what I was starting to move away from having put a lot of focus into. So the first little book I put together was on prenatal yoga practices, because that is something I had been sharing about, but yet was kind of moving away from as I was getting into other things. So my first little book is on, it's simple, everyday prenatal radiance, I think is what I got. So simple every day has been my thing. And so that was, gosh, I don't even know many years ago, 15 years ago. And then I made one about mom and baby. Yeah, like a little practice for mom and baby. And then the last one that I put up officially was called Feel Better Now. And that, again, is simple, everyday, like yoga therapy ideas of ways to use the practices very simply. So those are on Amazon. And then, I have one that I just put together on how to take care of our mood, mind, and mental health with these practices. So it's always about very simple ways to help people hopefully start to bring the practices into their daily lives. That's always my thing that I just seem to be into, is helping people bring it home and build it in and figure out what works for them and understand how to use it for themselves. So, that's been fun. Then I have, a couple others that are just in the finishing stages. So, it's been, I feel like it's a creative thing for me to just want to share, and to get it out there.
Well, you're also a speaker too, aren't you?
I am. I love to get to speak to groups, of all sorts, even like kids, teens, and adults. And it always does end up being about hopefully inspiring people to start to look at what they're doing daily with their self-care and even if they're interested in spirituality. So I really enjoy that, and I'm excited to keep doing more of that just to get this to the people, because it's really helped me so much through my life and growth and changes and challenges, and the people I've gotten to work with. And, I love that it's so empowering, that it's all this is things that we can do to ourselves, for ourselves. And I find the more that you're willing to do some things each day, it just can be easier to take care of the momentum of things like our mental health and our mood and our physical health and, how we're feeling about life and the world. So it's very empowering. I love that I'm hoping to empower people with it.
So do you teach yoga and meditation?
I do. I right now mainly do that through creating workshops and special events. And then I work with people one-on-one, helping them build personal practices, especially with if you're going to try to use some of the therapeutic stretches and poses from yoga. I've developed a specialty in helping people develop a nice, short, safe, personal practice that works really well to help get out of pain. So that's become a specialty of mine. And just doing that even more now with helping people bring meditation and breath work into their daily lives. So I'm not so much running around town teaching group classes like I once was, but I'm more creating specialized programs and offerings, and then online ways too, to do things through. I do different Zoom workshops and groups just to reach people who don't live near me as well. So I love it that it's really, I say it's like a craft and a trade for me, but it's really mainly me sharing because I'm so passionate about how this stuff works. and how I feel like it's so important how we tune ourselves. That's the word that's come through for me over the years. And now my brand is Tune You. And I think I kind of see my message is that it does, matter how we tune ourselves, and that really in the end only we can tune ourselves, even if we can get help from other people. But it does seem to be important what we're doing on the daily. And then I think just one last thing I'd say is I've gotten so interested also in mornings, right? And how important mornings might be in how we're tuning ourselves. And there's so much talk of morning routines and how more successful people might tend to have a morning routine, right? But I like to say, well, we all already have a morning routine, right? They're doing something when we wake up. So it's more about looking at, is that morning routine working for you as far as how it's setting you up for your day and how it's creating a focus for you, right? And a feel. So that's where I think it's, fun to let it be personal. And if you like, whether it's your cup of coffee, I mean, I love my morning cup of coffee. That's totally part of how I like to tune me too. It's part of my morning routine that I love. But maybe things like watching the news isn't something we might want to do as part of my morning routine. Maybe for some people it is, right? But that's where I think it's important to just find out what works for us and be willing to build it in as like a lifestyle.
Well, so do you work more just solo, or do you work with like certain groups or
That's a great question.
I mean, in terms of your work.
Yeah, I do. I do work solo plenty, but I love to collaborate and create events with other people. And I also really love to share other people I'm inspired by. And that's why, like, I have a podcast as well, just because I love to share people that inspire me. It lights me up so much. So that is part of the joy I get when I work with other people who I work with. A lot of like life coaches or tend to be who I tend to collaborate with, and I get to bring in more of maybe the mind, body, spirit aspects, even because they might be a little more just mind focused with their offerings. And just getting to work with other friends who like to offer like spiritual kind of offerings, whether it's, things like oracle cards or doing more like sound work collaborations, because that's such a powerful practice that people are so much more open to these days. So yeah, I love to do both, I guess. It's the ideal creating.
Have you ever wanted to learn to meditate? Check out my book, Meditation for Everyone: How to Quickly Have a More Peaceful, Mindful, and Fulfilled Life, and support this channel. With Meditation for Everyone, you will learn to quickly and easily meditate, relieve stress and anxiety, alleviate depression, and have more joy, peace, and relaxation. What you will learn: mindfulness, the art of stillness, step by step on how to meditate, strategies for overcoming challenges to meditation, and much more. D. Mason said this is a nice meditation book, even for those already meditating. I agree with the statements that it will help to have a more peaceful, mindful, and fulfilled life. 4.6 star rating, available on Amazon. So, do you think meditation is best in the morning, or does that just sort of vary from person to person? Because for me, I personally like the afternoons the best, but I haven't really seen anybody promoting the afternoon.
Well, I think that too is like, if we're talking about setting aside time for something that feels like your meditation practice, if we're talking about like sitting on a pillow in a traditional pose, right, as a way to do it, or lay down or sit, versus like, in my opinion, could be a walk. It could be other things that could be a form of meditation. But no, I think it could be any time of day. Absolutely. And some people, it might be midnight. So I think it's just a matter of building something in more like every day is going to help. I do think that what we do in our mornings does matter, and just kind of realizing it's its own form of meditation. But I don't think that our meditation practice has to be in the mornings. And then again, like we were talking about earlier, it starts to become seeing how we can just start to weave it in throughout our days, whether it's because we start to notice we need it, like we're starting to feel kind of stressed or out of balance in various ways. So we now know, oh, okay, I'm going to pause and take a few breaths and get in a more meditative mode and use some of my mindfulness practices to shift that in the moment, right? That is going to be hopefully what it becomes about, is we're weaving it in throughout our days. I think a lot of teachers talk about it can feel kind of maybe special to have a sacred time for yourself, or if like afternoons, I'm going to do my form of meditation, and there probably is some nice rhythm to doing that. But I think those are the kind of things we need to watch out for, keeping us from the practices, right? If we're like, well, I can't do it every day at the same time, and so I just can't do it, right? So that's where it's about finding our ways to do it. And that really, it could be in the car for a moment at a stoplight. There's so many ways it can become so simple. It doesn't at all have to be. And for sure, most people aren't comfortable sitting cross-legged. So that myth alone, I like to dispel. Like, it's never about, in my opinion, sitting uncomfortably even, right? Like, I know some meditation teachers say there's some value to if you sit there and it hurts, to like overriding the body and sitting there anyways. But I personally don't vote for that at all, especially since I've worked with plenty of people in chronic pain. I think if sitting there hurts, don't try to sit like that. Like, you don't need to sit like that. If you like to, great, but you can sit any way you want, lay any want, any position really can be a great place for meditation, in my opinion. Basically a place you can relax, right? Like you said, if it's about helping get in that place of awareness and relaxation, it's important you can relax in whatever position you're in. So I really like, that's another myth I like to maybe bust, that it has to be, cross-legged in that pose we see on commercials now.
But yeah, because I mean, even like a easy chair or recliner can be kind of nice to meditate in.
Absolutely. I would say the only things that might make it even better is if we're considering that, especially if we're going to be using our breath and being aware that that's creating some energy shifts, that if we could be a little more symmetrical and aligned, that could help with energy flow. But that could be in all sorts of positions. So absolutely, a recliner could be. And then I think it's just about listening to your body. If your body is like, oh yeah, that's the position, then that's a lot about what things like yoga is here to help us do, is find harmony with our body by actually listening to it more like that, instead of like, no, you're going to sit here whether you like it or not, and somehow that's going to help us. So yeah, I don't know where that became a custom, but I think for modern bodies it is not smart. If it hurts, don't stay there. That's your body talking to you. And yeah. Do you like to sit like cross-legged when you meditate, or how do you like to meditate?
Sometimes when I'm in the chair, I'll cross my legs, but a lot of times I actually just like to lay down on the bed and meditate.
Absolutely,
sometimes you have to be careful
great.
because you could fall asleep, but
right,
if you can do it.
And I always feel like I've loved that I've had teachers all along the way that have said, if you fall asleep, it probably means you needed it. Right. So not to feel like, oh man, I failed, I fell asleep. So, again, maybe your body needed a little rest, and that's what it wound up doing. But yeah, I think laying down absolutely is a great idea, especially because most of us sit in chairs plenty. Right. I mean, we get enough chair time. So laying down at least does change the situation physiologically. But, that's really traditionally the poses of yoga and doing things with the stretches were supposed to be so that you could be more comfortable to meditate, or to even sit and meditate. So that's where, in theory, if we just can't, even sit comfortably in a chair, which some people can't, it also might be might be nice to build in some of the right stretches to take care of that, so that you can get comfortable, right? Because even laying in bed, right? Some people, if they have chronic pain, even laying in bed could hurt. But yeah, I would just vote that means you might need some of the right therapy of the stretches to make it so you're more comfortable for the stillness. Yeah. And that's where I really love to share some of the yoga positions that are just all about relaxing and creating the relaxation response. Because a lot of people don't know that there's a whole side to yoga that's about that is not about working hard or sun salutes or pushing or forcing, but it's the opposite. And it can really be a nice way to facilitate meditation, especially if relaxing feels really hard. Right? Because a lot of us were like, okay, I'm trying to relax, but we're not. So it could be really nice to find some of the ways to just help your body relax, not just tell it to. And it can really facilitate the meditation state, especially when it's about getting more relaxed, to add some things like breathing or a position that can really turn on that calm.
Yeah, and like with walking meditations, sometimes it's kind of nice to just I did a walking meditation, for a class I was teaching in town, and I did it during Christmas time, and you could see the Christmas lights, which was kind of nice.
Absolutely. That's part of, I think, why I love walking so much. And I think walking as its own practice, it's such a great form of meditation and mindfulness. And what's great about it too, is it is doing its own energy work. So Thich Nhat Hanh talks a lot about just walking and mindful breathing, which is really just like being with our breath, and how that's just like this amazing practice. And I use that a lot. And especially if I'm like dealing with hard emotions and wanting to move through that, I know more than ever now, go on a walk, just be out in nature, the mindfulness of that, and then adding just being with my breath can really transform things. So yeah, that's where I really like to encourage. Walking is an amazing form of meditation and mindfulness, and it's so good for us mentally as well as physically, right? And just how it brings us into the moment and all those things that we get from mindfulness. Nature always works, right? Like nature's a great tool. Getting outside really just shifts us into that presence that just feels better, right? And is part of the mindfulness. And then if we decide to make it a practice, like you're doing when you lead a walk, that can really feel amazing. And then we can just, start. That's part of the lifestyle, is just deciding to practice things like mindfulness more, whether you're out walking or out at lunch with a friend, right? You're just kind of now more remembering to be here now and how that actually does feel good and better, right?
So what do you think about like music? Because some people see music as a positive enhancement. Some see it as you shouldn't have music, it's a negative, and some are kind of neutral.
Yeah, I think music and sound can be great tools for, if we're talking about meditation as a way to focus more, right? And right away, it does just help engage the mind to have some sort of music or sound as part of our meditation practices. And then music and sound are their own forms of, well, and then again, just listening to the song or the sound is its own form of meditation, in that it's giving you a place to focus and pay attention and even quiet your mind, right? Listen to the song instead of think, or listen to the sound of the bell instead of think. And then it's also its own energy work and has its own vibrational medicine. Music does, and so does sound. So that can be really transformative as well. So I think they can be awesome tools, although silence also can have its own curative effects if we can learn to enjoy that and play with that. So I think it's fun to see that a balance of the two can be nice in our lives. And again, to see what works for you. That's where I think it's nice for us to be open, that we're all so different. And so for some people, they might find music really helps them get in that. Again, if we're coming back to just helping them feel more aware and more relaxed. For some people, music may do that for them. For some people, it may not, right? And that's where it's kind of cool to just be willing to experiment. But I think both can be very medicinal for us, and to probably play with both can work for because we do get a lot of barrage of information and sound in today's culture. So I think probably a lot of us would feel power if we just intentionally allowed more silence in our lives. But I'm a big fan of how music and sound tunes us. Literally, it's another way the word works. But again, because it does tune our mind and our focus, it does have an effect on our body and our emotions. And then it can, help us get more in a spiritual feeling vibe if we want to use music that helps us feel that way, right? And that's where things like worship music over the years, right, is its own kind of magical blend of that, I think, with music and sound and being interested in spiritual connection, right? But that's a great question. And that's just my opinion, of course, too, at this point, and how I would answer that one.
Well, do you think meditation is a powerful tool for improving mental and physical health? Because I've heard that, meditation can help with things like PTSD and other forms of stress and anxiety.
Right. That's really the leading edge of the understanding that I've been so excited to be in on studying and understanding myself, and even applying more. And absolutely, I think that there's so much promise in getting into these practices in order to take care of our mental health and even improve it, which does mean like starting to become more aware of how we're using that mind and what sort of mental patterns might be happening, that are part of poor mental health and mood disturbances, right? And our meditation gives us a chance to do that in a compassionate way, and mindfulness also, so that really helps us come at it in a more heartful, even almost spiritual way that can be more functional. And then it's so nice that it can also help us, see that it is also stored energy, stored emotion, stored trauma. We now know that, it's all energy, that when we go through traumatic things, which I think most of us do on some levels, some people way more extreme, 100%, right? But yeah, there's now a lot of research to see how things like somatic therapies, which is anything to do with the body. So I would say things like yoga has always been a somatic therapy. So it means, acknowledging that if we've gone through some trauma, it might have stored itself in our body in a sense as a form of energy that may be festering as either the mental, emotional, disturbances or ways that we're feeling that don't feel great, and or even physical symptoms, right? We now know that some of that can start to manifest as those things. But I've loved coming to learn how we can use these practices to become aware of that, and then to start to take care of that and even transform it and work with it as a form of energy, but start to see how we can do that for ourselves and with ourselves, and by rewiring even how we are responding to that and learning a new way with ourselves. Because I also see like life's going to continue to bring stress and trauma. So now we're learning like ways to take care of ourselves through life, and just being able to drop in with meditation and check out how we're doing today, what's going on, what are we feeling, what's affecting us, and just work with it. Like start to do this inner work and, use these practices to do this inner work. But the positive end is so that we can be at a more optimal level with our mental, emotional health and our physical health, because that's all so connected, right? And that like stress is a thing these days. So for a lot of us, that's where I think Michael Singer's onto something, just seeing it. Relaxation is a primary technique. Even if we just were like, I'm just focusing on more relaxation, that would solve a lot of these things, right? And that's what these practices help us do too. So yeah, there's so much promise in what's possible. But it does involve a level of ownership, right? That yes, we can get help and healing from practitioners around us. Absolutely. And let's do that. And I think most practitioners would agree, it can be really powerful if we start to build in some new self-care with things like meditation, mindfulness, using gentle breath work, and even other forms of movement, that can help with the somatic sense, just helping it, that acknowledge that the body's involved, right? That it can help us really move through some of that and not just feel stuck in those emotional patterns or that trauma, which can have its own effects on us, right? So yeah, I'm excited to keep sharing about that and how it really can come down to our daily practices. Again, like seeing, oh yeah, that's why I'm meditating and doing these different practices to take care of my mental health. And again, in the end, we're really the only one who can do that, it turns out. Even if, again, we can get help from other people, but it's powerful what we can be doing on the daily with taking care of our mental, emotional, physical well-being.
I spent several years of my life stressed, anxious, and depressed. I needed to find something that would make my life work. For me, that was meditation. With meditation, I found the peace of mind that I was looking for. I found the happiness, and I found a way to improve every area of my life, my emotional life, my spiritual life, my relationships. I was able to discover things about myself. I can give you the tools to meditate. I will walk you through the process and hold your hand. Whether you're a beginner to meditation who's never meditated, or whether you're someone who's tried meditation and it just never seemed to work, we can make it work. Meditation is something that everyone can do, and I can show you how. Check out my course on meditation. Well, there can be self-discovery because, you're in a more relaxed, calm state and you're trying to detach from judgments, which might make it easier to kind of work through some of the traumatic things in our life than just when you're more
Absolutely.
conscious.
I think that's one of the biggest parts of the therapies of these practices is just that they're all built to get us more in compassion with ourselves and others. And then that alone has a big healing effect, right? Because most of us are being the opposite with ourselves, and that's got its own trauma to it for our bodies and our emotions. So it is about rewiring that. But yeah, being willing to honor what's true for us, and the compassion is part of the practices. Like that's one of the biggest pieces I think that helps us, that we want to remember. Anything that's just going to get us in a more compassionate place with ourselves. And then of course, if we're interested in being compassionate with others, I think that's only going to help us be more compassionate with others. And that's where I love, like, one of the Buddhist mindfulness practices I've learned, because even Buddhists do use words like prayer, it turns out, and add to things like their meditation and mindfulness practices. Like when we notice that we're suffering, like as part of our meditation, we might notice, wow, I'm really feeling some feelings, or I'm stressed right now, or, I'm suffering in a sense. That part of the therapy there could be to have that compassion with ourselves and that awareness, which again, just brings us more into our heart. But then we could even say out loud, like, may this suffering serve to awaken my compassion, right? And that might just be kind of a transformative way that we can open to how this is something that, right, might even have its benefit, or even just to alchemize it with the use of our words in like a intentional way, like a prayer. So those are some of the things I've been learning as part of a process of what to do when you're in there, noticing in the awareness. It's like, because awareness without compassion can be like hell, right? Like when we just start to notice all of our issues and how we're actually doing on the inside, because most of us, like aren't doing so great on the inside these days. So it can be pretty hard to see that, right? And then if we judge ourselves with that, it can be a slippery slope into mental health hell, and I've seen that with myself. And so that's where I realized, like, oh my gosh, that's where the compassion is the biggest thing. If we're going to take a look inside, we got to bring the compassion, right? Or it may not go well. So, and that's where I think it's nice too to realize part of it is having community that helps us be in that place, right? That can help us be wanting to remember to be more compassionate with ourselves, and having friends in our lives that might be interested in a similar approach, that just can be there. And even we can reach out if we're really suffering, and, realizing that in a sense. And I think I learned that a lot from these teachers too, is like, we're not really meant to totally do it alone either. So it's nice to make sure you do have at least some sense of a community, right? Whether it's just even one person that you might be in conversation and relationship with, that you get to kind of talk to about your awarenesses and your practices, right? And get the support to stay compassionate with yourself and not hate on yourself more and just down spiral, right? And feel more isolated. So yeah, that's been big parts of my learning these last few years.
Well, yeah, and I could see how, like, if you're compassionate with yourself, you sort of withhold or you don't have judgments about yourself. You let the judgments go, and you also have a certain level of acceptance with yourself. So they're all kind of interconnected: the non-judgment, the compassionate, the acceptance.
Yeah, I think it's almost like it'd be great to use all of them, right? Because I used to just use non-judgment a lot, and then as I started to hear it more as compassion, I was like, oh wow, that's even more, like what I need and what maybe a lot of us need. But I think acceptance too. And it's interesting how those all have such a different physiology to them too, right? Speaking of the opposites of stress, just to think of being more in compassion, it just feels better on the body, right? But it also does just help us do that emotional healing, and even moving through the the stored trauma. And then I think I would just share part of what I've been learning too is if we like the spiritual possibilities with these practices, like what you were talking about with this kind of getting into this detached awareness, part of what we can be doing is focusing more on more like a soulful spiritual place within us that's kind of like behind or beneath the thoughts and the trauma, and just knowing that's what our practices are helping us connect with also, that can be exciting. And that things like yoga teach, or that this stored trauma, that the more we get to clear that up with our practices, the more we're going to just more easily feel and be connected to that more like soulful part of us, which is just going to feel more like peace and love and joy, like, you know, a lot of the spiritual teachers say. So it's pretty cool to think the possibility of using these practices to clear up our emotional stuff and take care of ourselves emotionally, but also connect in spiritually if we like that. And that also could be part of just more of this peace within thing that we've always been hearing about. But yeah, that's where I'm seeing how this all helps us create that more peace within, love within, or even a sense of God within, if we like that. It is about tending to what's true, you know, taking care of it, transforming it, and tapping in a deeper way, and knowing that's what our practices are helping us do. Yeah, so I like the conversation.
So, like, if someone came to you and they said, I've heard good things about yoga and meditation, I've never done any of those, where should I start? What would you say to someone?
Yeah, you know, that's where I do love when I do get to personalize a practice, like what we might start with is, you know, if there are certain things that are like, if you're interested in like the physical practices of yoga, and you know, you might want to add some of the right stretches and movements and taking care of the body aspects, that it can be really helpful to tap into, like, if the body does have some symptoms right now and some imbalances that you're aware of, whether it's pain or other sorts of issues that might fester, or even things like, you know, if we feel like we're holding on to excess weight and we kind of want to address that differently, that we can personalize our use of things like the stretches so that it can be going after, you know, like some of the issues we really want to take care of first, but also in a very safe way, because we really want to make sure we don't add anything that isn't appropriate, you know, because we can make things worse and, you know, hurt you more with the wrong stretches. So I think, though, if someone was interested, that, yeah, I think the safest, smartest way might be to just start with some very restful, gentle positions, which, you know, I'm happy to, if we want to have a way, I can send anyone like a picture of one of my favorite poses that I like to suggest. That's just super restful, pretty safe for most people, unless you know you just aren't okay getting on the floor, because some people getting on the floor is too much. But something like that, adding just a gentle, restful yoga pose can be a nice way to know you're adding yoga, and it's supposed to be a time and form of meditation. So you can say you're meditating while you're there too. And it's a type and form of mindfulness. And it's also about breath work. So you're doing all of the above if you do this, 5-minute position. So I think that is one way. And I think just, being open to things that you already notice get you in that state of awareness and relaxation, like you like to call it. So if someone's been listening today and they're like, oh yeah, I really feel that way when I go walking, right? If that was something that lit someone up, I would say, start just trying adding that more to your days, and whether it's when you're not feeling great, or like, what if you did it preventatively, and just start to recognize that is a form and a time of meditation and mindfulness and being with your breath. And I think hopefully if they got anything from today, to bring in that compassion, right? Because that's what's going to be the real medicine as we apply all of this. And then of course, getting the right support. There's all sorts of these offerings out there in the world, and maybe gravitating towards someone that you feel safe and, kind of drawn to learn from. Because it's definitely, for me, I'm always learning. I'm still always learning. I'm always reading, and I'm always influenced by all the teachers I've learned from. So enjoying that it can be a learning thing, right? That you're like, okay, I want to start to learn about this and develop my practices, and find what works for me. Yeah.
So if people want to get in touch with you, where should they get in touch with you? Like Facebook,
Yeah.
Instagram?
Right. So all of those can be great. On Facebook, I'm at Laura Jane. On Instagram and TikTok and YouTube, I'm at Tune You with LJ. And then on I have a link tree at Laura Jane Yoga that shows some of my current offerings and even has a space if you wanted to book a 20-minute free consult to talk about how I could help you with your home practices. That's all right there. So I think that says it for now. I'm rebuilding my website right now, so I won't try to suggest that, but that'll be back up soon.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming on today. It was a pleasure to have you.
I so appreciate it, Jay. Thank you so much. And yeah, I appreciate y'all for being with us. Good to share. And yeah, thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Jay. Bye, y'all.